Beneath the surface of every great empire, every revolution, every royal court or fading republic, there have always been whispers. Whispers of men in cloaks, of codes written in invisible ink, of handshakes that meant more than treaties. Across the centuries, secret societies have woven themselves through the very fabric of history, sometimes guiding it, sometimes manipulating it, and sometimes simply watching from the shadows. They have been accused of engineering collapses, orchestrating wars, and preserving knowledge too dangerous for the world to see. But what if the true power of secret societies was not their members or missions, but the paradoxes they embodied? Ideas that bent logic, twisted morality, and danced between illusion and reality. What if the essence of secrecy lies not just in concealment, but in contradiction? Tonight, as you settle into the dark comfort of sleep, we'll descend into a quiet world where real historical paradoxes echo through the halls of forgotten orders. Each one reveals a strange truth, one that refuses to be fully understood. And as the paradoxes unfold, you may find that history's greatest secrets were never locked away, just hiding in plain sight. Now close your eyes and listen carefully. The first paradox begins. I am lying. That's it. Just those 3 words. And yet they've haunted philosophers, logicians, and secret keepers for over 2,000 years. The liar paradox is simple to say, but impossible to solve. If the statement I am lying is true, then the speaker is lying, which means the statement is false. But if it's false, then they're not lying, so it must be true. And on it goes, looping endlessly, trapped in a self-contradicting knot. It's not just a logical puzzle, it's a mirror reflecting the limits of human certainty. In the world of secret societies, truth is currency, but it's also camouflage. Consider a spy delivering disinformation, saying a lie that seems so obviously false. It makes the hidden truth even harder to detect. Or think of secret confessions, deliberately phrased to leave room for denial. The liar paradox lives at the heart of these strategies, and perhaps nowhere is it more embodied than in the oath of silencer, vow taken not to protect truth, but to distort it beyond recognition. Historically, the paradox echoes through the whispers of groups like the Rosicrucians, who claimed they existed but refused to show themselves. We are real, they said, but no one will ever see us. It's not far from the liar's voice. Believe me but don't. Even the Freemasons, one of the most documented secret societies, have often been accused of speaking in paradoxes, claiming to be just a fraternal order while wrapping themselves in mystery, symbolism, and hidden knowledge. Are they harmless, dangerous, enlightened, deceptive? The answer changes depending on who you ask, and that's exactly the point. The power of the liar paradox lies not in its contradiction, but in its disruption. It shakes the foundation of what it means to know anything, and that's what makes it so potent in the shadowy world of secret orders. When the lines between truth and deception blur, control becomes a matter of perception. In such a world, a well-placed lie can function as both shield and sword. This paradox also finds resonance in the psychological tactics used by totalitarian regimes and covert operations. We're watching you for your protection. There is nothing to fear, but everything is under control. These are liar paradoxes dressed in uniforms and broadcast from podiums. Their goal is not to be believed or disbelieved, but to exhaust your ability to tell the difference. The ancient Greeks knew how dangerous this was. The philosopher Epimenides of Miletus first posed the liar paradox as a way to explore the instability of logic, but perhaps even he didn't anticipate how many centuries it would ripple through not just philosophy, but power itself. Secret societies, especially those accused of manipulating events behind the scenes, thrive in ambiguity. They don't need you to fully believe the theories, just to doubt what you already think is true. That is the essence of influence through paradox. Not the direct lie, but the impossible loop. So the next time you hear someone say, I have nothing to hide, remember the paradox that started it all. The lie that proves itself wrong by trying to be honest. The truth that destroys itself by declaring it as false. It's only the beginning, and it's already unraveling what you thought you knew. Now let us move to the next paradox. Buried deeper in the folds of history and secrecy, one that questions the very identity of what stays the same over time. Imagine a ship, not just any ship, but one beloved by its people, preserved over generations. This vessel, known as the Ship of Theseus, once carried a legendary hero through countless voyages. As time passed, parts of the ship began to decay. Rotted, sails tore, nails rusted. Slowly, carefully, each piece was replaced with new material, until after many years, not a single original part remained. And here's where the paradox surfaces like a question from the deep. Is it still the same ship? At first, you may think yes. After all, the design remains, the shape persists, and it has been continuously maintained. But now imagine that every discarded part was saved, each worn plank, each rusted nail. Eventually, someone uses those old parts to reconstruct the original vessel elsewhere. Now there are two ships, one made entirely of new materials, and one made entirely of the old. Which one is the real ship of Theseus? This question isn't just philosophical, it haunts the identity of every institution, every belief system, every secret society. In the hidden corridors of power, whether among the Knights Templar, the Bavarian Illuminati, or the modern-day descendants of ancient orders, the ship paradox pulses, quietly beneath centuries of reinvention. Secret societies are masters of transformation. They adapt, dissolve, rename themselves, and re-emerge with new robes, new creeds, and new followers. Yet they claim continuital lineage, passed from hand to hand, right to right, tongue to tongue. The Freemasons of today may perform rituals bearing the same names as those in the 1700s, but their symbols, structures, and purposes have shifted. Is it still the same society, or merely a shadow draped in familiar colors? This paradox is especially eerie when applied to ideologies. Take a belief, say, the pursuit of hidden truth. Over time, it may lose its original meaning, gain layers of secrecy, be infused with new myths, used to justify darker agendas. What happens when the foundational ideas are replaced one by one? Is the core still intact? Or is it a ship sailing under a stolen name? Even national identities are not immune. Some secret orders worked beneath thrones and flags that no longer exist, yet their spirit, their methods, and sometimes their archives survived. When these groups reappear in different forms behind corporate fronts, in elite universities, in online conspiracies, are they still the same society? Or are they like the rebuilt ship, only as authentic as the story you attach to it? This paradox also sneaks into personal identity. The human body replaces itself constantly. Over a decade, nearly every cell in your body has died and been replaced. Your thoughts shift, your memories fade. The person who once joined the secret societies wearing loyalty in a candlelit chamber may not even think the same way anymore. So, are they still bound to their original vow? In the world of espionage and cults, the ship paradox becomes more than just a riddle, it's a tool. Manipulation thrives when identity is malleable. Rebranding a society, altering its story, or rewriting its history can be a way of avoiding detection, bypassing accountability, or reasserting control. Wasn't us, they might say. We've changed, but have they? Sometimes the paradox turns deadly. Consider the tale of societies that began with noble missions, protecting sacred texts, preserving ancient knowledge, shielding humanity from chaos, but slowly mutated, one change at a time. A new leader here, a rewritten ritual there, until, centuries later, they stood for the very opposite of what they were created to uphold. Yet still, they carried the same name, the same ship. And perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the ship paradox is this: both answers can be true. Yes, it's the same ship. And no, it isn't. Because identity isn't always about components, it's about continuity, about belief, about what we're willing to accept as the same. That's the power of paradox. It doesn't demand an answer, it demands that we see the layers, that we question not just what survives, but why it survives, and who benefits from the illusion of sameness. So the next time you hear of an old society resurfacing, or a long-forgotten group claiming ancient roots, look closer. Ask yourself, has every plank already been replaced? Or are you staring at a ship that sailed away centuries ago and only now returned with a new crew? Let us now move on to a paradox that stretches across space and time, where identical lives are separated by velocity and age becomes relative. Time is not what we think it is. For centuries, we assumed it marched forward steadily, ticking equally for kings and beggars, warriors and scribes, the visible and the hidden. But the twin paradox shattered that illusion and exposed time itself as pliable, strange, and disturbingly unfair. Imagine two identical twins. One stays on Earth, living a quiet, ordinary life. The other boards a spacecraft and travels at near speed across the stars. Decades pass. But when the traveling twin returns, something is wrong. He's younger than his brother, not just by a little but by years. One has aged, and the other has barely changed. They were born at the same moment, but time did not treat them the same. This isn't science fiction, it's real physics. The theory of special relativity, proposed by Einstein in 1905, predicted this exact outcome. Time dilates objects in motion relative to a stationary observer. The faster you move, the slower time passes for you. At the extreme edge of speed, time nearly freezes. You can live decades in a handful of minutes, or return to find that everyone you once knew has aged, or vanished. For secret societies obsessed with immortality, this paradox isn't just enticing. Imagine a group that believes the secret to eternal youth isn't hidden in elixirs or magic texts, but in velocity. What if someone discovered that by orbiting Earth fast enough, they could outpace aging itself? A clandestine organization using space as their sanctuary, sending their chosen few into high-speed stasis while centuries pass below. When they return, their enemies are gone. The world has changed, and they're still young enough to rule it. In a more symbolic sense, the twin paradox reflects the fractured timelines of groups that disappear from history only to resurface later, almost untouched. Think of the Knights Templar, officially disbanded in 1312, publicly humiliated, hunted, and erased. But centuries later, echoes of their rituals, symbols, and structure appear in entirely new contexts, from Freemasonry to speculative banking. Empires too coded architecture. They vanished hand and they didn't. Time passed for the world. But for the myth of the Templars, it stood still. This paradox also mirrors the way knowledge ages. An idea, buried in an old text or secret archive, can lie dormant for centuries. When rediscovered, it feels new, young, even revolutionary, while everything around it has moved on. It's as if the idea was in motion, immune to decay, waiting for someone to catch up. There's also a psychological element to the twin paradox. Members of secret societies often describe a disconnection from the normal flow of time. Their initiations, rituals, and codes isolate them from the ordinary world. Time inside their brotherhood moves differently. Years may pass outside. Within, they remain anchored in a timeless structure of oaths, roles, and hidden truths. To them, the world ages, but their purpose does not. The paradox becomes especially haunting when you imagine the traveler's return. Picture stepping back onto familiar ground only to find yourself a relic of the past or a stranger in the future. Your twin, once identical, now wears the years you escaped. People remember what you forgot to live. It's a loneliness wrapped in survival. A price paid not in blood, but in lost time. Could this be the fate of vanished societies? Disbanded, under pressure, only to return decades or centuries later unchanged, but to a world unrecognizable. What secrets might they still guard? What missions might they still pursue? And do they know the weight of what they missed? Ultimately, the twin paradox reminds us that time is not a democratic force. It bends, it favors, it separates. In the hands of the powerful law, the secretive that flexibility becomes a weapon. Whether in actual science or metaphorical manipulation, those who control time, control narrative, and those who emerge untouched by time appear almost divine. So the next time you hear a rumor about a group that vanished long ago but appears to operate today exactly as it once did, ask yourself, did they stop aging, or did we just keep moving? Our journey continues next with a paradox far more dangerous, one where tampering with the past threatens the future, and where secret knowledge risks unraveling reality itself. What if you could go back in time, not just observe the past, but change it, intervene, redirect, even erase? What if you traveled back with a single purpose, to prevent something terrible from ever happening? Let's say, to stop a tyrant from rising, a war from igniting, or a tragedy from befalling your family. Now imagine you go further. You step into your own bloodline. You decide to eliminate the source of future suffering, your grandfather, not out of cruelty but necessity. Without him, your parent is never born. Without your parent, you are never born. And if you're never born, you never travel back in time to commit the act, which means your grandfather lives, which means you're born, which means you go back again, and again, and again. This is the grandfather paradox, a paradox of time travel that breaks the spine of causality. It asks, if you change the past in a way that prevents your existence, who did the changing? Secret societies, especially those said to guard ancient knowledge or manipulate global events, often play with ideas like this, not literally, perhaps, but symbolically. Because in many of their myths, their influence extends backward as well as forward. They are the unseen hand, writing history from behind the curtain, rewriting the past to shape the future they desire. The grandfather paradox isn't just science fiction, it's a metaphor for intervention without accountability. Imagine a powerful group that subtly removes key figures from history, kills a reformer before they publish their book, sabotages a movement before it begins. From the outside, nothing seems to change. The future simply unfolds in a different way. But deep in the archives of forgotten holes, someone knows the world was meant to turn differently. That we see this logic echoed in real-world events, documents go missing, whistleblowers disappear, revolutionary voices are silenced before they reach their audience. Was it chance or preemptive historical pruning? In this way, the grandfather paradox becomes a model for covert control, not just erasing a person, but erasing their potential. Even more disturbing is the idea of erasing oneself for a greater cause. Some radical sects and cults built around messianic prophecy have encouraged members to sacrifice their future spiritually, socially, or biologically, believing their death or disappearance would alter the course of time. Their leaders whisper that, by vanishing, they create a void so significant that it reshapes history. The paradox also questions the fragility of lineage, a concept treasured by many secret orders. Bloodlines, succession, inheritance all crumble under the grandfather paradox. If a single choice in the past undoes an entire family line, then continuity is never guaranteed. Legacy becomes a lie told by survivors. On a psychological level, the paradox speaks to guilt and regret. Haven't we all wished, at times, that we could go back and stop something before it started, before we lost someone, before we made that mistake? Secret societies, steeped in rituals of remembrance and repentance, often carry the weight of old sins, wars they funded, kings they betrayed, knowledge they buried. But what if they could go back and undo it? Would they still exist? Would the world be better or just different? The grandfather paradox becomes even more disturbing when applied to historical manipulation. Imagine a secret group so powerful, it engineers events that erase entire branches of possibility, not out of cruelty but control, a failed rebellion never spoken of, a suppressed invention never discovered, a visionary thinker assassinated before their ideas could bloom, erased not from the present, but from the very record of what could have been. This paradox is a warning to all who tamper with origin. To change the past is to gamble with existence. Every ancestor you silence unravels your place in the story. Every history you erase risks pulling you into non-being. It's not just about killing your grandfather, it's about erasing the path that brought you here. And yet, there's a strange allure in this, the ultimate control over destiny, to not only shape the future but to remake the past in your own image. It is the fantasy of gods and tyrants, and it lives in the hearts of those who believe history is theirs to rewrite. So the next time you hear of a family that vanished from records, a manuscript that no longer exists, a society that denies its own foundation, ask yourself, was it forgotten or was it unmade? Next, we turn to a paradox that deepens this loop where objects create themselves. History folds in on itself, and origin becomes an illusion. Where did it come from? That's the question that unravels everything in the Bootstrap Paradox, a paradox not of contradiction, but of originousness. It begins when something is taken from the future and placed into the past, only to become the very cause of itself, a book, a weapon, a person, a piece of knowledge. It loops through time, never created, never destroyed, always existing because it causes its own existence. Take for instance a simple object, a watch. A time traveler journeys back to the year 1800 and hands the watch to a young man. That man studies it, reverse engineers it, and eventually passes down the design until it becomes the very blueprint the time traveler uses to manufacture the original watch in the future. But who created the watch? No one. It exists in a causal loop, a snake eating its tail. Its origin is an illusion. This paradox is named after the expression, pulling oneself up by one's bootstraps, doing the impossible by relying on yourself for your own creation. And in the secretive world of hidden orders and esoteric brotherhoods, this logic takes on eerie meaning. Many secret societies claim to preserve knowledge from the ancients, alchemical texts, cosmic diagrams, strange geometries passed down from some mythical golden age. But what if those ideas weren't passed down, but passed around, shared across time, appearing older than they are, or arriving before they were invented? What if some of the knowledge we revere as ancient was first uncovered in the future? Imagine a mysterious manuscript discovered in a monastery, its diagrams far ahead of its time. It's copied, translated, and studied by secret groups for centuries. But one day, in the far future, a historian finds those translated notes and sends them back in time to be discovered. The paradox completes itself. The text exists, but it was never authored. It only looped. That is not just theoretical. Some of the most curious texts in history, like the Voynich manuscript, seem to have no clear origin, no known author, and no traceable purpose. They appear out of time, full of encoded knowledge that resists interpretation. Some believe they're hoaxes, others believe they're fragments of ancient wisdom. But what if there's something else entirely, a message from a timeline that loops? The Bootstrap Paradox also has implications for ideologies. Consider a prophecy that inspires a secret society to form. They devote themselves to fulfilling it. Over time, their actions set into motion the very events the prophecy foretold. In the end, the prophecy was true only because they believed it was. The cause and effect are indistinguishable. They created their own myth. They became the echo of their own voice. This is the power of belief within secret organizations. When a society acts as both guardian and origin of its doctrine, it becomes immune to outside scrutiny. Where did this wisdom come from? Outsiders ask the answer from us. Even if they received it from the future, or inherited it from a fabrication, it doesn't matter. The loop sustains the illusion of authority. In more sinister examples, the Bootstrap Paradox can be used to manufacture legitimacy. Imagine a ruling elite that plants a forged ancient text claiming divine right. That text is preserved, quoted, and taught for generations, until a new ruler cites it as justification for their own rise. But that ruler's ancestor wrote the text in secret to begin with. Truth, in this context, is irrelevant. Only persistence matters. The paradox also invites us to consider self-fulfilling timelines, a concept seen in both fiction and historical legend. A secret group believes they are destined to stop an apocalypse foretold in a lost scripture. They dedicate themselves to prevention. But what if their actions extreme, zealous, violent cause the very chaos they hope to stop? They don't realize that the warning wasn't a prediction, it was a trigger. This kind of feedback loop between cause and effect mirrors the dark logic behind many cults and extremist cells. Driven by fear of a future event, they become the architects of that event. They close the circle without knowing it. The Bootstrap Paradox whispers a terrifying truth. Not everything that exists has a beginning. Some things persist only because we believe they must. A secret society that loops itself through time, ensuring its own formation and survival, never created, never destroyed, would be the ultimate guardian of paradox. And it would be impossible to expose, because to challenge its existence, you'd have to answer, when did it start? Who made it? And what if the answer is no one? Next, we encounter a paradox where movement becomes impossible, where logic defeats motion, and where philosophy paralyzes progress. You take a step forward, then half a step, then half of that, and half again. No matter how small, there's always a fraction left to cover. According to ancient reasoning, you'll never truly arrive because between any 2 points lies an infinite number of smaller points, each one demanding its own moment to cross. Motion becomes impossible. This is Zeno's paradox, or more precisely, one of many paradoxes crafted by the Greek philosopher Zeno of Ilia in the 5th century BCE to challenge the very concept of motion, time, and continuity. The most famous form is the dichotomy paradox, which suggests that before you can get from point A to point B, you must first get halfway there. But before reaching halfway, you must go a quarter of the way, then an eighth, then a 16th, and so on. The path is divided endlessly. Mathematically, the sum of these fractions converges to a finite distance. But conceptually, you are faced with completing an infinite number of tasks. And how can anything, person, idea, or society complete infinity for secret societies? Zeno's paradox is not just philosophical, it's strategic, because when every goal is broken down into infinitely smaller goals, progress becomes paralysis. Systems can be designed to never finish. Revolutions can be redirected into endless reforms. Promises can be postponed through careful planning. And so, motion continues, but arrival never comes. Consider bureaucracies built to process justice, societies or institutions with secretive governing bodies that claim to be reforming from within, always progressing, always working toward transparency but never arriving. Each step is followed by another smaller step. Each answer creates a new question. The illusion of motion replaces true resolution. In historical terms, Zeno's paradox appears in the way power structures maintain themselves. The transformation of a society may seem inevitably, it is always just out of reach. Monarchies transition to constitutional rule, but retain their palaces and bloodlines. Empires fall, but their economic control persists under new flags. Ideologies collapse publicly but continue underground. Every change is partial. Every destination is postponed at secret societies, whether real or rumored, often adopt this slow drift of power. They operate quietly over generations. Their plans are described in layers, goals within goals, ranks within ranks, truths behind truths. Their progression is deliberately incremental. By the time anyone realizes they've moved, it's too late, and yet they'll insist they haven't moved at all. Zeno's paradox is also a mirror of initiation rituals. To ascend through the ranks of a secret order, one must often complete layer upon layer of tasks, learning symbols, reciting codes, proving loyalty. But when is one truly in it? Is there ever a final truth revealed, or is the path intentionally infinite? Each new level hints at a deeper mystery. You're always halfway to illumination. This same logic fuels conspiracy theories. Once you begin to follow the thread, who controls this? What's really behind that? You are never done. Every answer leads to another unanswered fraction. Sure, you saw that symbol, but did you see the one hidden behind it? The deeper you go, the more motion you feel, but the farther you are from certainty. In the realm of mathematics, we now understand that an infinite series like 1/2 plus 1/4 plus 1/8 plus 1/16 does in fact add up to a finite number. The paradox, then, lies not in the math, but in the mind. Our brains struggle with infinity. We fear the idea that something can always be broken into more, that progress can be eternal, and that we might be chasing shadows forever. Paradox even echoes in psychological manipulation. When someone is always almost ready to commit, to change, to reveal yet never does, it creates a state of suspended reality. You're always waiting, always anticipating, always advancing, but never arriving. It's a form of control, one that leaves you exhausted without ever delivering what you sought. And in this way, Zeno's vision becomes a model for secrecy itself. You can approach the truth. You can move infinitely close. You can learn, study, decode, and decipher. But the final answer, the whole truth, it's always a little farther ahead, a step you never quite reach. And that is how secrets remain untouchable. Zeno wasn't just a philosopher, he was a paradox artist. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous illusions are the ones that feel like movement, and that the slowest trap is also the most elegant one that lets you run forever. But never leave the cage, so the next time someone promises you that the truth is just one more document, one more connection, one more secret, ask yourself, are you moving, or are you just dividing steps? Now prepare to enter a paradox built entirely from contradiction, where a single sentence erases itself and logic collapses under its own weight. More than 2,500 years ago, a man named Epimenides of Crete stood before a crowd and spoke the words that would echo through eternity. All Cretans are liars. At first glance, it seems like a harmless accusation, but Epimenides was himself a Cretan, so if his statement is true, then he too must be a liar, which would make his statement false. But if it's false, then not all Cretans are liars, so he might be telling the truth, which means he's lying, and on it goes, collapsing under its own weight, rebuilding itself the moment it falls. This is the Epimenides Paradox, one of the oldest and most haunting examples of self-referential contradiction. It's not just a puzzle, it's a philosophical loop that strikes at the root of logic and trust. And in the secretive world of clandestine orders, hidden alliances, and whispered truths, this paradox becomes more than a riddle, it becomes a strategy. Because what happens when the source of truth is the very thing calling itself into question? Secret societies, especially those rumored to influence political power or religious doctrine, have often functioned in this slippery space. They issue public denials cloaked in half-truths. They release leaks that discredit themselves. They plant falsehoods not just to confuse but to destroy the possibility of knowing anything for certain. Consider a shadowy group that is accused of manipulating global events. In response, they issue a public statement: we are not real, and we have never influenced history. But if they truly have no influence, why issue a statement at all? If they are real, then the denial is a lie. If they're lying, the statement may actually be confirming their existence. Now imagine you're trying to investigate them. Every source you find quotes another, each denying or contradicting the last. Documents surface that disprove themselves. Testimonies from former members contradict one another. You become tangled in a web where every claim erases itself. The truth is buried not beneath silence, but beneath recursive contradiction. This is the Epimenides Paradox at work. It doesn't hide the truth, it exhausts the seeker. We see echoes of this paradox in religious texts as well, particularly when prophets or spiritual leaders speak of their own unworthiness. or when sacred laws seem to contradict the authority of those who proclaim them. I am not to be trusted, one says, but if we believe that, aren't we trusting them? Entire systems of faith and doubt have spun from this recursive structure. In psychological warfare and propaganda, the Epimenides Paradox becomes a deliberate weapon. Conflicting messages are broadcast intentionally. A group may say, "You are free to question us," while simultaneously punishing anyone who does. They tell you, this is not censorship, as they erase the evidence. They assure you, we are transparent, while locking the doors. The result, you no longer know what to believe in your own perception. This kind of manipulation isn't just clever, it's foundational. A secret society doesn't have to control the truth. It only has to make truth impossible to define. When every statement disqualifies itself, you no longer seek truth. You retreat into submission, distraction, or numb acceptance. In this way, the paradox becomes a kind of conceptual virus. It infects every level of inquiry. It loops through logic until trust collapses. It's not about deceiving you, it's about making you doubt the very possibility of not being deceived. Even in science and mathematics, self-reference becomes perilous. Gödel's incompleteness theorem's mathematical versions of this same idea prove that in any complex system, there will be statements that are true but unprovable. Logic contains its own limits. Knowledge contains its own blind spots. Secret societies that understand this wield it with precision. By embracing paradox, they become untouchable. We don't exist, they say, and even if we did, you couldn't prove it. And if you try, every trail leads back to the paradox itself. Their greatest strength is that they don't have to hide. They only have to disbelieve themselves publicly enough that no one else knows what to think. So what do you do in the face of such contradiction? You pause. You question the frame, not just the facts. And you remember that truth is not always something shouted from the mountaintop. Sometimes, it hides in the silence after someone calls themselves a liar. The Epimenides Paradox doesn't just twist logic, it destabilizes authority, identity, and belief. It teaches us that some lies are designed not to be uncovered, but to trap the act of uncovering itself. And now, as we descend further into the strange folds of reality, we encounter a paradox where the boundaries of mathematics collapse and set theory breaks under its own rules. 800 to 850 words at first. It seems harmless, a problem of lists, labels, and logic. But when Bertrand Russell exposed it in the early 20th century, it sent shockwaves through mathematics and philosophy alike. Entire logical systems collapsed, foundations cracked, and secret societies, especially those obsessed with symbols, categories, and hidden orders, were forced to confront an unsettling truth. Some systems implode simply because they include themselves. Russell's paradox begins with a simple question: does the set of all sets that do not contain themselves contain itself? Imagine a barber who shaves all men in town who do not shave themselves. So does the barber shave himself? If he does, then by definition, he shouldn't. If he doesn't, then he must. The act of including himself in his own category breaks the rules. This is the essence of Russell's paradox, a logical contradiction that arises when a system tries to define itself from within. In mathematics, it exposes deep problems in set theory. In society, it exposes something more dangerous: the fragility of self-reference. Secret societies thrive on structure. They create ranks, symbols, rituals, hierarchies. Everyone has a place. Everything belongs to something. But what happens when the system that defines everything tries to define itself? Can a hierarchy assign itself a rank? Can a symbol symbolize its own meaning? Russell's paradox haunts every organization that grows too elaborate, to self-differential. The inner circle refers to the deeper circle. The rulebook refers to the one who wrote the rulebook. At some point, the system folds in on itself and no longer makes sense. Some secret societies understood this. That's why their highest truths were often paradoxical. The Gnostics taught that to know God, you must unknow the world. The Hermetics believed that the answer to everything was hidden in the contradiction of opposites. As above, so below. A statement that mirrors itself, referencing the whole within the part. Others feared the collapse. Certain Masonic branches eliminated degrees that grew too recursive. Some Rosicrucian texts warn initiates not to question the structure of the order itself. That which reveals the order of revelation must remain unrevealed. A perfect expression of Russell's logic trap. In intelligence agencies and covert cells, this paradox becomes tactical. Consider a spy who manages all other spies who report on people not like themselves. But what happens when someone is tasked with watching themselves? When oversight becomes introspection, contradictions arise, power structures blur, paranoia blooms. In history, we see this collapse of categories when empires try to classify the very cultures they dominate, then find themselves reshaped by those cultures. The British Empire once categorized colonized people using systems of race, caste and language only, to discover that those systems began redefining British identity itself. The classifier became part of the classification. Russell's paradox also infects ideologies. Consider a belief system that preaches tolerance toward all belief systems except those that are intolerant. It sounds noble until it encounters contradiction. If it tolerates intolerance, it defeats itself. If it refuses to tolerate intolerance, it becomes intolerant. Just like the barber's razor, every action cuts in both directions. This is why secret societies sometimes adopt layers of deception. They compartmentalize. They hide meanings within meanings, separating the surface from the source. Because if every part referenced every other part, including itself, then nothing could function. The structure would collapse under its own recursive logic. Even on a personal level, this paradox creeps in. If your identity is defined by how you define identity, what happens when your definition changes? Can a person fully understand themselves from the inside? Or are we all barbers, standing before mirrors, trying to shave a reflection that shouldn't exist? Russell's paradox whispers a terrifying thought. There are things that break not because they are wrong, but because they tried too hard to be complete. Total systems, whether philosophical, political, or secret, cannot include everything without destroying themselves. There must be limits. There must be mystery. Otherwise, the structure becomes a paradox and swallows itself. Some believe the most powerful secret. Societies don't seek all knowledge, they seek the border of knowledge. They exist not to explain everything, but to guard the edges where meaning collapses, where language twists, where logic eats its own tail. That's so the next time you encounter an idea, an organization, or a belief that claims to be the answer to everything, remember Russell. Ask the forbidden question. Does this system explain itself? And if it does it survive the explanation? Next, we'll descend into a paradox that sharpens this loop even further. One where the simple act of categorizing others creates an impossible contradiction within identity itself. In a quiet village, there lives a barber. He's respected, tidy, and follows a strict rule. He shaves all and only those men who do not shave themselves. At first, this makes perfect sense. If a man doesn't shave himself, the barber shaves him. If he does shave himself, the barber leaves him alone. Clean logic. Until one question breaks it all. Does the barber shave himself? If he does, he shouldn't, because he only shaves those who do not shave themselves. But if he doesn't shave himself, then he must, because he shaves everyone who doesn't. The rule loops back and consumes itself. It's a contradiction, a logic trap without escape. This is the Barber Paradox, a vivid and relatable version of Russell's paradox, created by Bertrand Russell to illustrate how simple rules can destroy themselves when applied universally. What begins as tidy order collapses into impossibility. Now imagine this paradox not in a village, but in the secret hierarchy of a powerful organization. A hidden council enforces rules upon all who lie or deceive. But what happens when one of them lies? Who polices the enforcers? Who disciplines the guardians? Can a secret society regulate itself with the same rules it applies to others? The Barber Paradox becomes an allegory for self-regulation in systems of power. It applies not just to logic, but to surveillance, ethics, and control. In countless governments and intelligence communities, oversight agencies are assigned to prevent abuses, yet who watches the watchers? The moment a governing body attempts to police itself using its own authority, it steps into the barber's dilemma. Secret societies, especially those steeped in hierarchy, often mirror this structure. Each level watches the one below it. But what of the highest level? If the top tier must be pure, incorruptible, above scrutiny, then who checks them? If they enforce secrecy but also define secrecy, the result is a paradox, one that either creates tyranny or collapse. History offers eerie reflections of this logic. Think of the Inquisition's organizations designed to root out heresy within religion. At some point, even the inquisitors were accused. Then, those who accused them, the blade kept turning inward. Eventually, the system devoured itself. Unable to resolve the contradiction between purity and fallibility, the Barber Paradox also speaks to ideological purity. Many cults and secret orders require members to uphold strict moral or intellectual standards. But when someone breaks a rule, especially a leader, what happens? If they punish themselves, they admit fault and invalidate their position. If they don't, they break the rule of equal treatment. Either way, the system fractures. This paradox even haunts whistleblower scenarios. Picture an insider in a secret society who tries to expose wrongdoing from within. If their role is to protect the group, but exposing truth harms the group, they violate their duty. If they don't expose the truth, they violate their conscience. Like the barber, they stand in a loop with no resolution, and it gets more chilling when applied to identity. Imagine a person whose sole purpose is to help those who cannot help themselves, but then they fall into despair. Do they help themselves, or does their role require someone else to intervene? The contradiction creates paralysis. A personal version of the barber's bind. The reason the Barber Paradox resonates so deeply is because it feels familiar. It mimics situations where we're trapped by conflicting roles: parent versus friend, enforcer versus believer, insider versus observer. These roles ask us to act in mutually exclusive ways, and when institutions face this same trap, corruption, confusion, or collapse often follow. Some secret societies bypass this paradox through separation of power. They fragment responsibility. One body enforces, another interprets, another judges. That way, no one is left holding the blade aimed at their own throat. Others create elaborate myths to explain why certain rules do not apply to certain members. He is beyond judgment. She was chosen. The contradiction remains, but it is buried beneath symbolism. And sometimes, societies embrace the paradox. In certain occult orders, the highest initiate is expected to break the rules as a final test. In doing so, they acknowledge that the structure is flawed and become its master, rather than its servant. They shave themselves, and in doing so, transcend the system. This final twist hints at the deeper danger of the Barber Paradox. It's not just a riddle, it's a mirror. It reveals that systems built on rigid self-reference will eventually encounter a moment they cannot explain. A moment where the blade turns inward, and no one is left untouched. So the next time you hear of a group that claims to cleanse the world of lies, or enforce justice on all others, ask, do they shave themselves, or are they trapped in their own reflection? Coming next is a paradox of omnipotence itself, one that questions the limits of absolute power, and whether a force that can do anything can also undo itself. Can an all-powerful being create a stone so heavy that it cannot lift it? This is the heart of the Omnipotence Paradox, one of the most provocative thought experiments in the history of philosophy and theology. It asks, if a being is truly omnipotent of doing anything, then it should be able to create such a stone. But if it creates a stone it cannot lift, then there is something it cannot do: lift the stone. If it can lift it, then it cannot create a stone too heavy to lift. In both cases, the being is limited. Thus, omnipotence seems logically impossible. Now imagine how this paradox plays out behind the curtains of secret societies, especially those that claim, or are believed, to manipulate the world from behind the scenes. For such a group, power is everything. The ability to shape, to decide, to erase, to elevate. But if they truly had unlimited power, they would eventually confront the same trap. The point where ultimate control cancels itself out. Let's say a secret cabal creates a surveillance network so complete that it sees every action, every whisper, every movement on Earth, but in doing so they become trapped by their own net. To maintain total observation, they must also observe themselves. To monitor dissent, they must monitor their own members. At a certain threshold, power becomes paralysis, omnipotence becomes a prison. The Omnipotence Paradox is not just about gods or metaphysics, it is about the boundaries of influence. Every institution that strives for complete control eventually confronts the same dilemma. The cost of total authority is the destruction of freedom, and with no freedom left to shape, power becomes hollow. It collapses into a loop of maintaining itself. Even in history, we find empires that reached too far. Monarchs who demanded absolute rule found themselves strangled by paranoia, forced to control not only their subjects, but their courtiers, their family, even their thoughts. The ruler who can do anything often ends up doing nothing, because every action carries the weight of undoing their illusion of omnipotence. Secret societies, if they exist in the shadows, must balance this carefully. Their power depends on restraint. If they intervene too much, they become visible. If they reveal too little, they lose influence. The illusion of omnipotence, being suspected of controlling everything, is often more powerful than actually doing so, because true omnipotence, once tested, becomes falsifiable. This paradox also speaks to myth-making. Many hidden orders have been mythologized as all-seeing, all-knowing puppet masters. The Illuminati, the Priory of Sion, the 9 unknown men. These stories grant them godlike power, but rarely do these myths consider the consequences of such power. If they control everything, then they are responsible for everything. Every war, every famine, every mistake, and if they're not responsible, then perhaps they aren't omnipotent after all. The paradox invites us to question our own longing for authority. Humanity has always invented gods and leaders who could fix it all, who could lift the burden of free will. But the Omnipotence Paradox reveals the danger of that fantasy. A power that can do anything must also confront what it should not do or what it cannot undo. In literature, we see this explored in cautionary tales. A wizard granted infinite power becomes consumed by it. A wish for limitless influence backfires. The more power one gains, the more one becomes isolated from the world they sought to master. Omnipotence is lonely. It allows for no opposition, no dialogue, no growth. Now think of a secret society formed to protect the world from chaos. At first, their interventions are subtle, removing corrupt leaders, stopping wars, advancing knowledge, but over time their mission becomes impossible. Every change causes new instability. Every solved problem births another. To truly end chaos, they would need to freeze history, stop movement, change, life itself. And in that frozen state, power would have nothing left to govern. So the Omnipotence Paradox is not just a riddle, it is a warning. It tells us that absolute power is structurally unsustainable, but the fantasy of unlimited control is a trap, one that secret societies and leaders alike have fallen into. Power must limit itself to remain functional. A system that acknowledges its own boundaries survives. One that believes it can transcend all contradiction, create an unliftable stone and lift it to eventually collapses under the weight of its own arrogance. So next time someone claims they can fix everything, solve everything, be everything, yourself, have they already built the stone that will undo them? We now turn to a cosmic question, one that looks not at gods or logic, but at the night sky and wonders why, in a universe so vast, we are still alone. It began with a question casual, almost innocent, uttered during a lunch conversation in 1950 by physicist Enrico Fermi. Where is everybody? The universe is vast. There are over 100 billion stars in our galaxy alone, and likely more than 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe. Many of those stars have planets. Many of those planets are in the habitable zone. If life arises even on a fraction of them, then intelligent civilizations should be everywhere. So why haven't we seen them, heard them, found any trace? This chilling silence is known as the Fermi Paradox, the contradiction between the high probability of extraterrestrial life and the complete lack of evidence for it. Now imagine how this paradox whispers through the inner chambers of secret societies for centuries. The possibility of otherworldly contact has loomed in the background of hidden orders and esoteric teachings. From the ancient myths of sky gods and star visitors to modern conspiracies about UFO cover-ups, the idea that someone else is out there has always been wrapped in both awe and terror. What if secret societies know the answer to the Fermi Paradox and have kept it hidden? One possibility, echoed in both science and speculation, is the Great Filter Theory. It suggests that intelligent life tends to destroy itself before reaching the stage of interstellar travel. Nuclear war, environmental collapse, or technological suicide might be the inevitable price of intelligence. Secret societies might see themselves as custodians, working behind the scenes to help humanity pass through the filter without unraveling. But there's another possibility far darker. If someone is out there, and they're deliberately staying silent, some theorists suggest that the universe may be full of civilizations practicing cosmic quarantine, avoiding contact, hiding in radio silence, afraid to draw attention. Perhaps they've seen what happens when powerful species collide. Perhaps they know the cost of visibility. This brings us to the dark forest hypothesis. In a galaxy teeming with life, each civilization is like a silent hunter, hiding, watching, knowing that to reveal yourself is to risk annihilation. Secret societies, if aligned with such knowledge, may understand that secrecy is survival, that broadcasting our existence to the stars could bring about a reckoning. Their silence, then, becomes not suppression but strategy. It also reframes their obsession with rituals, symbols, and coded communication. If there are watchers beyond Earth or even beyond time, then every act must be layered with concealment. What appears to be mysticism may in fact be encryption. What looks like dogma may be a cosmic protocol. There's yet another interpretation of the Fermi Paradox. that ties directly into ancient secret orders. They came, they left, and they were remembered as gods. Many mystery schools, from the Dogon people of Mali to the builders of the pyramids, reference beings of extraordinary knowledge descending from the stars. To mainstream historians, these are myths, but to esoteric circles they are warnings. Humanity may not be the first civilization to rise, or to fall. Perhaps others visited long ago, tested us, failed us, or guided us and vanished before we understood what they were, and maybe, just maybe, some societies still preserve what they left behind. In the 20th and 21st centuries, the Fermi Paradox has taken on new urgency. With the rise of space travel, quantum computing, and artificial intelligence, we are rapidly approaching the technological thresholds once thought to lie in the distant future. If a secret society ever sought to gatekeep cosmic contact, that time is running out. Governments, corporations, and even private individuals are reaching beyond Earth. What happens when a message arrives and it doesn't go through them? Or worse, what if the message has already come? Perhaps the Fermi Paradox isn't a paradox at all. Perhaps it's a riddle with a known answer, buried in a vault beneath a Vatican archive, a Masonic chamber, or a forgotten monastery. Perhaps someone listened and chose not to reply, because not all silence is empty. Sometimes silence is instruction, sometimes silence is containment, and sometimes silence is mercy. So the next time you stare into the night sky and feel the chill of its quiet, ask yourself, are we truly alone, or has someone ensured that we believe we are? As we drift deeper into the shadows of logic and control, we now explore a paradox that challenges our very sense of choice, where two options are presented, but the future may already be fixed. You walk into a room. Before you are two boxes, box A and box B. Box A is transparent and contains $1,000. Box B is opaque. You're told that box B contains either nothing or $1 million. You may choose to take only box B, or both boxes. But catch, a powerful predictor, someone with an almost flawless record, has already made a prediction about what you will choose. If the predictor thinks you'll tick only box B, they've placed $1 million inside it. If they predict you'll tick both boxes, they left box B empty. You can't change their decision, they've already made it. So, what do you choose? This is Newcomb's paradox, a deeply unsettling thought experiment that pits free will against determinism and logic against belief. Mathematically, it seems wise to take both boxes after all. Box A gives you a guaranteed $1,000, and box B's contents are already fixed. But if the predictor is almost always right, the people who took only box B walked away with $1 million, while those who took both usually got just $1,000. The question becomes, do you trust the prediction more than your own decision? Now imagine this logic operating in the shadows of a powerful secret society, an elite group that doesn't control the world by force but by prediction. They don't manipulate outcomes, they anticipate them using information, surveillance, psychological profiling, and statistical forecasting. They can predict what individuals and entire nations will do before they do it. The illusion of choice remains intact, but the future has already been shaped. Newcomb's paradox offers a terrifying framework for understanding how such groups might operate, not as rulers, but as prophets of probability. They do not act to cause events, they simply ensure that those events are already expected. An expectation, as any magician or strategist knows, often becomes reality. This paradox forces us to confront a deeper truth. If your actions can be predicted with high accuracy, are you still free? Secret societies may not need to enforce laws or create conspiracies. If they can predict that you'll demand a certain kind of leader, buy a certain kind of lie, or reject a certain kind of truths, they don't have to intervene. You'll walk yourself right into the outcome, and you'll believe you chose it. Freely. Newcomb's paradox also highlights a principle that many esoteric orders have long embraced. Belief changes outcomes. If you believe the predictor is infallible, you'll likely take only box beyond win big. If you believe the future is up to you, you'll likely take Python to end up with less. The choice isn't just about logic, it's about trust, faith, and submission to foresight. Some secret teachings speak of the divine architect, or the hidden hand, a force that knows what will happen. Not because it controls reality, but because it understands its patterns so completely. Knowledge isn't mystical, it's predictive. The symbols, the rituals, the ranks, these may not be about controlling the world, but about aligning with the inevitable. In modern terms, think of how much is now predicted about you without your consent. Algorithms know what you'll click, what you'll buy, who you'll vote for, and once predicted, your behavior is subtly steered toward confirming the prediction. The opaque box of the future already has something in it, but you're nudged to make the right choice to ensure the contents make sense. Now take this to its logical conclusion. A secret society doesn't need to enforce reality, it simply needs to know how reality usually unfolds. From that vantage point, they are not tyrants or saviors. They are curators of probability, silently watching us take the boxes they always knew we would. The power here isn't in control, it's in credibility. The predictor in Newcomb's paradox doesn't need to be divine, it only needs to be believable. If a secret order has convinced enough people that they always know what's coming, then belief alone may guarantee their success. People act accordingly. Nations make decisions based on the fear or faith that someone else already knows what will happen. And perhaps that's the most unsettling part of Newcomb's paradox. The predictor doesn't force your hand. You force your own based on what you believe they know. So, what would you choose? Both boxes. 1. Would you trust the odds or trust the prophecy? Would you believe in your freedom or in the pattern? Because somewhere in the shadows, someone may already have predicted your answer now. We turn to a paradox born not of games or probabilities, but of certainty itself, a contradiction that challenges what it means to know something, especially when every outcome seems guaranteed to fail. You buy a ticket in a massive lottery. You know the odds, millions of tickets are sold, but only one will win. Now ask yourself, do you believe your ticket will lose? Most likely, yes. After all, the probability of any single ticket winning is astronomically low. It's entirely rational to believe your ticket will not win. Now extend that reasoning. You believe this about every ticket. Each individual one is almost certainly a loser. But logically you also know that one ticket must win, and there lies the contradiction. This is the lottery paradox, a situation where it is rational to believe of each individual proposition that it is false, yet irrational to believe that all of them are false together. You can reasonably believe ticket A will lose, and ticket B, and ticket C, and so on. But if you believe they will all lose, you're contradicting the truth that one of them must win. This tension between individual belief and collective certainty forms the backbone of the lottery paradox, and it haunts the secretive logic of hidden societies more than it seems. Because at its core, the paradox asks a question every shadowy order must answer. Can rational thinking still be wrong on a massive scale? Imagine a secret society operating quietly behind world events. Their greatest strength may not lie in wealth or weapons, but in knowledge of probabilities. They know that truth isn't always about certainty, it's about belief management, about controlling what people think is likely and unlikely. The lottery paradox becomes their perfect camouflage. If someone begins to suspect the existence of such a group, others might say, that sounds far-fetched. The odds of that being true are so low. Each theory, by itself, seems irrational, but put together, those doubts may hide a disturbing truth. Many people might reasonably disbelieve each piece of a larger picture, and yet the whole picture is true. This is how conspiracies remain hidden in plain sight, not because they are unseen, but because belief in them seems individually irrational. Sure, one lie in government, one cover-up in science, one anomaly in finance, each, on its own, seems dismissible. But when you put them together, the pattern begins to emerge. The paradox is not in what we see, it's in what we refuse to accept together. The lottery paradox also speaks directly to how information is suppressed or discredited. When faced with a dozen whistleblowers, it's easy to say, that one sounds unbelievable, or this one is probably mistaken. But if we doubt each voice individually while ignoring the collective weight, we fall into the same trap. We assume that because each piece seems unreliable, the entire structure must be false, when in fact, truth may hide in the pattern of the improbable. In intelligence operations, this logic is weaponized. A group might spread 20 different theories, some absurd, some plausible, or slightly flawed. Publics will rationally reject each one, but buried among them is the truth, hidden not by secrecy, but by plausible disbelief. The mind does the rest. It throws out the improbable pieces, never realizing that one of them was real. This paradox also reflects the structure of many secretive initiations. Imagine a group that offers multiple conflicting truths to its members. Each candidate is told, this is the real purpose of our order. Some hear about ancient knowledge, others political influence, others spiritual awakening. Later they discover contradictions between them, but by then, it's too late. Which version is the truth? Maybe none, maybe all. And there's another dimension to consider. Self-justification. Secret societies may rely on the lottery paradox not just to hide from outsiders, but to manage belief within. Each member believes that their own role is small, limited, or unlikely to matter. I'm just a financier. I only handle archives. I just follow orders. Each sees their part as disconnected, yet collectively, they may form a machine of enormous influence. No one believes they hold the winning ticket, but someone does. This paradox teaches us a painful truth. Reasonable doubt can obscure undeniable reality. In a world flooded with noise, lies, partial truths, and manipulated data. We begin to trust our instincts. And our instincts say, that sounds unlikely, that sounds fake, that can't all be true. And so we disbelieve everything piece by piece until the totality of the truth disappears into fragments. So the next time you find yourself doubting a story because each part seems off, ask, are you evaluating a ticket, or missing the lottery itself? We now approach a paradox of logic and observation, one that questions how we form generalizations, and how seemingly unrelated truths may be connected in deeply irrational ways. All ravens are black. It sounds like a simple scientific hypothesis, easy to test, easy to believe. Every time we see a black raven, we feel this belief is confirmed. That's how inductive reasoning works. We gather examples that support a general rule, but then comes a strange twist. Suppose we see a green apple. Can that also confirm that all ravens are black? It sounds absurd, but according to strict logic, it might. This is the heart of the Raven Paradox, first proposed by philosopher Carl Gustav Hempel, also known as Hempel's Paradox. It shows how the process of confirming a hypothesis leads to conclusions that defy common sense. Here's how it works. The statement all ravens are black is logically equivalent to all non-black things are not ravens. So, if you see a green apple, which is a non-black thing and also not a raven, it technically supports the second statement. Therefore, by confirming all non-black things are not ravens, the green apple becomes evidence that all ravens are black. And yet, your intuition screams, that's ridiculous. A green apple should have nothing to do with the color of ravens. But logic disagrees. This paradox doesn't just break logic, it unsettles trust in observation itself. And that's where secret societies, masters of misdirection and perception, begin to take interest. In a world of hidden influence, the Raven Paradox is a tool. It exposes how truth can be confirmed by unrelated things, and how appearances can mislead investigation. If people are trained to only look for confirmation in familiar places, then the truth can hide in plain sight, untouched, unchallenged. Imagine a secret group accused of controlling politics. Investigators search for links between this group and political parties, laws, donations. They find none. Then someone points out a completely unrelated charity, a soup kitchen. It has no connection to the group. By the logic of the Raven Paradox, this absence of connection may actually strengthen the belief in the group's political influence. How? Because it reinforces the idea that the group does not touch areas where it has no interests. Thus, all the more suspicious when they do touch something. This is the twisted genius of the paradox. You can gather infinite confirming data yet be no closer to the truth if you're not careful. Even the most random detail can be made to seem like evidence. This is particularly dangerous in conspiracy theories, where confirmation bias runs rampant. Every symbol, every phrase, every handshake becomes a raven. Every non-eventer person not speaking out, an empty response, a quiet denial becomes a green apple. It confirms what believers already believe. Secret societies have long understood that control over what counts as evidence is far more powerful than control over facts. If you can make people see connections where none exist, ignore contradictions that scream for attention, you don't need to hide your secrets. You only need to reshape the rules of observation. This paradox also haunts science and academia. It reminds us that confirming a hypothesis isn't always about stacking up supportive examples. It's about weighing the relevance of those examples. And in a world drowning in data, secret knowledge doesn't have to hide, it just needs to be buried under too much of everything else. Some esoteric teachings hint at this idea. With symbolic language, what is known cannot always be shown. What is shown cannot always be known. They speak in riddles, not to confuse but to train the mind away from false confirmation, to develop the discipline to reject noise, even when it looks like support. The Raven Paradox also challenges our faith in pattern recognition, one of humanity's oldest survival tools. We're wired to see meaning in coincidences, to link cause and effect even when they're miles apart. Secret societies, or even the myth of them, thrive in this space. The more mysterious they are, the the more people assemble their own patterns, whether real or not. And so, you begin to see ravens everywhere. Or worse, you begin to see green apples and call them ravens too. This paradox forces a disturbing realization. More evidence doesn't always bring more clarity. Sometimes, it brings more confusion. Sometimes, it creates the illusion of understanding where there is only mysterection. So next time you think you've found proof, ask yourself, am I holding a raven or just another apple? Our next journey takes us even further into a paradox where the vague boundaries of change and identity are stretched until meaning disappears grain by grain. How many grains of sand make a heap? If you have one grain, clearly that's not a heap. Add another, still not a heap. Keep adding, grain by grain, and eventually, you'll have what we all agree is a heap. But where did it happen? At which grain did the transformation occur? When did not a heap quietly become heap? Now reverse it. Start with a heap and remove a single grain. It's still a heap. Remove another. Still a heap. But keep going. And eventually there's nothing left. At which moment did the heap vanish? This is the Sorites Paradox, sometimes called the paradox of the heap. And it tears apart the boundaries of vague predicates, concepts that seem obvious until we try to define them precisely. What counts as a heap? As tall, as bald, as rich, as powerful? The Sorites Paradox doesn't give us an answer. It shows us that there may not be one. And in the shadowy world of secret societies, this paradox becomes more than a riddle, it becomes a method. Imagine a secret order that gains influence, not through a single act but through increments. A seemingly harmless gathering of academics becomes a network becomes an advisory council. A council becomes a silent influence behind national decisions. No single moment marks the transformation, so the power never registers on the public radar. By the time anyone notices, the heap is already there. This paradox is the strategy of gradualism. Many hidden groups or authoritarian regimes have used it throughout history. Change is never sudden. It arrives in quiet steps. Laws are modified slightly. Words are redefined. Symbols evolve. By the time the structure looks completely different, no one can point to when it began. It's not just about gaining power, it's about losing freedom. Remove one right, then another, then a protection, then a voice. At what point do you realize it's no longer the system you trusted? That's the trap of it hides radical change in invisible steps. Consider initiations in secret societies. A new member joins and is told the group is about mentorship, then they're taught about heritage, then symbolism, then rituals, then influence. Each step is small, just a grain of sand, but eventually, they find themselves part of something vast and ancient, perhaps sinister, with no idea when their own transformation truly occurred. Even on a personal level, the Sorites Paradox infiltrates identity. You wake up one day feeling lost, disconnected, different. But when did that start? Was it yesterday, a year ago? Or was it 1,000 unnoticed changes, a shift in belief here, a compromise there that led you here? Secret orders have long understood the power of the gradual. Sudden change draws attention. Subtle shifts go unchallenged. This is how societies are shaped, not by revolutions but by redefinitions. Today's truth becomes tomorrow's confusion. What once meant liberty now means compliance. What once meant symbol now means command. And the Sorites Paradox explains why resistance is hard. How do you fight what you can't define? At what point do you say, this is too far, when you can't even say when it began? The paradox also underlies modern disinformation. Flood the public with thousands of tiny distortions, half-truths, and manipulated facts. No single piece seems dangerous, but collectively, they form a narrative so powerful it feels inevitable. A heap of lies built, one grain at a time. There's also a reverse form of Sorites by erosion. Histories vanish slowly. Archives are redacted one line at a time. Cultures are rewritten, not by burning books, but by changing definitions in them. Secret knowledge becomes legend. Legend becomes myth. Myth becomes forgotten. And by the time someone looks back, the trail is gone. This is the paradox of vanishing by increments. No single act erases the truth, but truth, like the heap, is fragile. And when it's made of 1,000,000 grains, no one notices when one is missing, or 2, or 20,000. The Sorites Paradox doesn't offer a solution, it offers a warning that everything changes, not just through catastrophe, but through neglect, distraction, and complacency. And that by the time we ask, how did we get here? The answer is already lost in the dust. So next time you feel something slipping your Freedom, your identity, your clarity, don't ask, has it vanished yet? Ask how many grains have already been removed. Now we approach a paradox that ties logic into Naz's statement that is undeniably true, yet cannot be said without sounding completely false. Here is a sentence that will break your brain. Yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation, yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation. Take a breath, read it again, and then prepare to spiral. This is Quine's paradox. Named after the philosopher and logician W.V.O. Quine, it's a self-referential sentence, like the liar paradox but with a twist. It's a sentence about what happens when you quote and then interpret the sentence itself. But instead of simply calling itself a lie, it describes what happens when you talk about it, and by doing so, it folds logic into a feedback loop that refuses to stabilize. You quote the phrase, you read it, then the sentence says that when you do exactly what you're doing, quote, it yields a falsehood. So, is it true or false? If it's false, then it doesn't yield falsehood, meaning it's true. But if it's true, then it does yield falsehood, making it false again. And just like that, we're caught in a loop not of content, but of structure. Unlike some paradoxes that rely on hypothetical situations or statistical reasoning, Quine's paradox operates on language itself. It shows that even the act of expression can be that our tools of understanding statements, definitions, quotations, can eat themselves alive under the right conditions. Now imagine this kind of paradox, embedded within a secret society, one that guards, not gold or power, but meaning itself. Picture an ancient order whose greatest secret is a phrase that, once spoken, undermines its own authority. A mantra, a sentence, a symbol that destroys meaning by being acknowledged. Like a key that vanishes when inserted, or a lock that relocks when opened. Quine's paradox is a weaponized idea thought that collapses thought. Many secret societies play with self-reference in their rituals and doctrines. Their teachings often come in layers, each one referring to the next, each one depending on the last. At first, this feels like deep wisdom, but eventually, if you trace the circle far enough, you realize there is no beginning, no fixed truth, only statements about statements. Truth wrapped in quotation marks, infinitely. In mysticism, this is reflected in the concept of hidden names, divine or cosmic words that lose power when spoken aloud. In some esoteric traditions, it's believed that the name of God is so sacred that to say it fully would unravel reality, because it contains within it a reference to everything including itself. Quine's paradox is a modern linguistic ghost of these ancient fears. It also shows up in more mundane places. Think of corporate policies that say, this policy overrides all policies, including itself, or government clauses that declare, this clause cannot be repealed unless this clause is repealed. These aren't just contradictions, they are systems, built to loop back on themselves. Secret orders might deliberately design rules like this not to confuse their initiates, but to control the limits of meaning. If you can make someone believe that a sentence means something, and that same sentence tells them it doesn't, you've caught them in a loop they can't escape. That's how you control a mind, not through force, but through recursive collapse. Even in digital spaces, this paradox creeps in. Chatbots, AI, and code interpreters occasionally run into errors that reflect this logic. Execute the command that says not to execute this command. Machines don't just glitch, they spiral. And if society is increasingly run by systems that interpret language and instruction, then Quine's paradox becomes more than academic. It becomes a design flaw in the architecture of reality. On a personal level, the paradox hints at emotional recursion, too. Have you ever felt yourself caught in a thought that undoes itself? I'm not good enough because I think I'm not good enough, or I don't trust anyone, including myself. These are psychological quince loops of identity and logic that can trap a person in doubt, fear, or paralysis. A secret society that understands this doesn't need to hide information. It only needs to infect you with the right kind of sentence, one that deconstructs itself as you try to understand it. A truth that becomes false the moment you believe it. A rule that destroys obedience by requiring it. So ask yourself, have you ever followed a truth that folded in on itself? Have you ever tried to define something, only to realize the definition destroyed the concept? That is Quine's paradox. It is not the content of the message that traps you, it is the structure of understanding itself. Next, we descend into the jaws of a logic problem where clever wording, surprise timing, and psychological manipulation collide. Picture a philosopher standing at the edge of a bridge. On the other side stands Socrates. The philosopher, acting as gatekeeper, lays down a condition. If you tell the truth, I will let you cross. But if you lie, I will throw you into the river. Socrates, never one to shy away from a mental challenge, replies, you will throw me into the river. Now the philosopher is trapped. If the statement is true, if Socrates will be thrown into the river, then he should be allowed to cross, because he told the truth. But if the statement is false, if Socrates won't be thrown into the river, then he has lied, and should be thrown into the river. But if he's thrown in, the statement was true. And if he's not thrown in, the statement was false. Either way, the philosopher cannot act without violating his own rule. This is the haunting loop of Buridan's bridge, a medieval paradox attributed to 14th century French philosopher Jean Buridan. It's a self-referential puzzle that traps authority in its own condition. Paradox of justice, language, and power. But this isn't just a thought experiment. It's a blueprint for how power collapses when it meets its own logic. In secret societies, particularly those that govern through rules, riddles, or oaths, Buridan's bridge becomes a silent threat, a situation in which no decision preserves the system's integrity. Imagine a hidden order whose members can only advance if they speak a truth no one else knows. Now suppose one initiate says, you will not accept me. If the order accepts them, then the statement was false, and they have failed the test. If they reject them, the statement was true, and thus, they have passed. But either outcome undermines the rules. Buridan's bridge reveals how rigid systems of conditional authority can collapse when faced with recursive statements. It's not about whether the statement is true or false. It's about the impossibility of enacting justice without betraying the rules meant to uphold it. In legal systems, this paradox often rears its head in more subtle forms. Consider laws that apply only if you're guilty but require action before guilt is proven, or rules that demand transparency, but only after secrecy has already caused damage. Like the philosopher on the bridge, judges and leaders find themselves trapped by logic, unable to act without self-contradiction. Secret societies are not immune. In fact, many are built on carefully nested rules, conditions of access, knowledge, and rank. And yet all it takes is one well-placed statement like Socrates' to destabilize the whole structure. Buridan's bridge also reveals a deeper moral dilemma. The philosopher wants to do the right thing, but the right thing depends on truth. And truth, in this case, depends on an action that hasn't yet occurred. This is the paradox of preemptive judgment, a danger in any system that tries to enforce justice before the facts are fully formed. In psychological terms, the bridge becomes a metaphor for confrontation with self. Imagine standing before your own conscience and saying, you will punish me. If your conscience punishes you, it affirms the truth, but that means it shouldn't. If it doesn't, then you've lied and deserve punishment. No resolution brings peace. This is how power, once built on certainty, begins to unravel. And in modern times, the paradox echoes in systems of surveillance and control. If a government says, we will only investigate those who pose a threat, and someone says, you will investigate me, what should they do? If they do investigate, they confirm the threats, thus violating the condition. If they don't, they risk being wrong. The result? Stalemate, paralysis, quiet injustice. Buridan's bridge is not about rivers or philosophers. It's about what happens when language becomes a trap. When systems are so logical they defeat themselves. When rules create situations where no response is correct. In these spaces between action and contradiction, secret societies flourish. Because while others debate what is true or false, right or wrong, they operate in ambiguity. They thrive in paradox, in the moment where action becomes impossible and silence becomes strategy. And so the next time someone offers you a promise, you will be rewarded if you are honest. Listen closely, then tell them, you will punish me, and watch their logic collapse. As we move forward, we turn to a paradox less about rules and more about awareness, where you cannot say something without revealing that you should not be saying it, and where the line between knowing and declaring grows dangerously thin. Step into the strange territory of Moore's paradox, revisited, or, perhaps more intriguingly, prepare for the silent contradiction of the surprise test paradox. I went to the store today, but I don't believe that I did. Read that again. The sentence isn't grammatically incorrect, it isn't logically false, but something about it feels deeply wrong, mentally dissonant, like a gear grinding inside your brain. You can't quite pinpoint the issue, but you know it's there. This is Moore's paradox. First articulated by philosopher G. E. Moore in the 1940s, it refers to statements that are syntactically fine and may even be logically consistent, yet are psychologically incoherent. You can say them, You can imagine situations in which they could be true, but you cannot believe them while saying them, at least. Not sincerely. For example, it's raining, but I don't believe it's raining. You're lying, but I don't believe you are. This society is controlled, but I don't believe it is. Each sentence contains a statement and a denial of belief in that very statement. And this paradox does something far stranger than contradicting logic. It breaks the act of believing itself. In the hidden chambers of secret societies, this paradox becomes a potent psychological tool, because it reveals a rare kind of vulnerability not in what people know, but in what they admit to themselves. Imagine a society built on dual truths, what is spoken aloud, and what is privately believed. Its members are required to say one thing, perhaps in oaths, in rituals, in public statements, while internally feeling something different. Over time, this disconnect doesn't just cause discomfort, breaks down identity. The mind becomes a fractured place where language and belief diverge. Moore's paradox thrives in such environments. In fact, many authoritarian regimes, intelligence, networks, and closed communities depend on performative belief, where you must say what you don't believe, and deny what you know. You declare your loyalty while doubting everything. You say, the mission is noble, but you don't believe it. You say, our leader is honest, but you don't believe it. You live the paradox. And that mental split, it's not just confusing, it's dangerous, because the more often you engage in this behavior, the more your own sense of what you believe becomes foggy, untrustworthy, or irrelevant. Secret societies that understand this use it deliberately. Imagine a trial. By contradiction, a new initiate is told, speak the truth, you know, and then deny it aloud. Not to others, but to yourself. What begins as a test becomes a way to fracture the internal compass of the person, is no longer sure whether their beliefs are genuine or rehearsed. Moore's paradox is especially haunting in politics and media. Picture a politician who says, this policy will help the people, but I don't believe it will. The public might never hear the second half, but he does. The paradox lives quietly in private speech, closed meetings, and internal memos. The result, cognitive dissonance weaponized. This paradox also infects truth-tellers and whistleblowers. Someone might uncover a vast conspiracy, a crime, or a secret, then share it, while admitting, I know this is true, but even I can't fully believe it. Because sometimes, the truth is so massive, so horrifying, so unthinkable, that believing it becomes a threat to sanity itself. Moore's paradox also emerges in the study of trauma and gaslighting. A person may say, what happened to me was real, but I don't believe myself. They know what occurred, but their belief in it has been dismantled. This is no longer a linguistic oddity, it's a crisis of internal coherence. A person trapped in this state becomes easier to control, to silence, to erase. Within secret organizations, especially those that manipulate perception, this paradox is gold. It creates confusion without contradiction, obedience without belief, and silence without force. And here lies the danger. You don't need people to believe the lie, you only need them to stop trusting their own belief in the truth. Moore's paradox teaches us that not all manipulation happens through deception. Sometimes it happens through belief, by separating what we know from what we feel, what we say from what we trust. So next time someone tells you, I'm free, but I don't believe I am, or this isn't happening, but I know it is, listen closely. They may not be lying. They may be speaking from a place beyond contradiction, a place where belief has broken, and the self has splintered. Now we descend into a final paradox of this chain, one that involves a hungry reptile, a logic loop, and a terrible consequence for trying to define fairness too precisely. But wait, we've already done the Crocodile Paradox. Then perhaps it's time for a new contradiction where even naming something gives it the power to disappear. A crocodile snatches a child from the riverbank. The panicked parent begs for the child's return. The crocodile responds with a riddle. I will return your child, if and only if you correctly predict what I will do next. The parent quickly says, you will return my child. Now the paradox begins. If the crocodile intends to return the child, the parent's prediction is correct, so, according to the condition, the child should be returned. But if the crocodile does return the child, the prediction was right, which means the crocodile must return the child anyway. So far, so good. But here's the twist. What if the crocodile chooses not to return the child? In that case, the parent's prediction is wrong, so the crocodile shouldn't return the child. But that would make the prediction incorrect, which fulfills the condition for not returning the child. And yet, it contradicts the original premise. Thus, the crocodile is trapped in a logical loop. Any action it takes leads to a contradiction. This is the Crocodile Paradox, a lesser-known but chilling example of self-reference, conditional truth, and the impossibility of fair judgment when logic becomes entangled in itself. Now, imagine this scenario in the hands of a secret society with crocodiles, but with truth. You are told, "We will reveal our secrets if you can correctly guess what they are. If you guess wrong, they don't tell you. If you guess right, they say you already know, so they don't need to tell you. Either way, the truth is withheld." The Crocodile Paradox becomes a blueprint for concealment. This is how secretive institutions protect their knowledge by shifting the conditions of revelation. They place you in logical traps where knowing becomes the very reason you're denied confirmation. You've stepped too close, and for that, the door closes. Historically, this kind of logic has been used in cryptic societies, religious orders, and even intelligence networks. They dangle a test. If you understand, we will tell you. But what if understanding excludes the need for answers? What if proving you know something disqualifies you from being told? This is the psychological game at the heart of elite orders. Truth as conditional hostage. It also mirrors authoritarian regimes that say, "We will give you justice if you are innocent." But if you claim innocence, they suspect you're lying because only the guilty claim innocence. If you admit guilt, you prove their power. No answer you give releases you. That's the crocodile's trap. The Crocodile Paradox also taps into ethical dilemmas. What is justice if it depends on paradox? Is it fair to offer something with conditions that cancel themselves? In law, in morality, in secrecy, this paradox reveals the limits of rational systems when they're built on conditional promises rather than principles. That's also a metaphor for the way power works. The crocodile holds the child, the stakes are high. But instead of brute force, it uses conditional logic to assert dominance. You're not allowed to demand the truth. You're told to earn it by playing a game you cannot win. Secret societies thrive on this exact model. The more you try to expose them, the more they point to your failure as evidence you don't understand. But if you do understand, if your prediction is accurate, they discredit you for having guessed too well. If he knows that much, he must be part of it. Truth becomes a weapon turned inward. And in intelligence circles, the Crocodile Paradox becomes even more dangerous. Imagine a double agent who says, "I'll tell the truth if you can predict my loyalty." But if you trust them and they lie, you're betrayed. If you don't trust them and they're loyal, you've lost a valuable ally. Every move you make affirms the opposite. Welcome to the swamp of circular logic. In the digital age, we see echoes of the paradox in algorithms and predictive policing. A system might say, "We'll intervene in communities at risk, identified by certain behaviors." But those behaviors may be responses to surveillance. The prediction triggers the result, and the result justifies the prediction. The child is never returned. The game is never winnable. So what's the lesson? The Crocodile Paradox is not just a puzzle, it's a warning. It shows us how logic, when wielded without ethics, can become a tool for control. That conditional truths can strangle genuine understanding. That promises based on circular thinking are not promises at all. That's so the next time someone offers you the truth, if only you can guess it, ask yourself, is this a gift or a trap disguised as one? Next, we venture deeper into the realm of thought and expression, into a paradox where stating the truth makes it unbelievable, and speaking honestly becomes an act of contradiction. At noon on one weekday next week, but the day of the hanging will be a surprise. You will not know which day it is until the executioner arrives at your cell. The prisoner, clever and determined not to be caught off guard, begins to reason. I can't be hanged on Friday. If I haven't been hanged by Thursday night, then Friday is the only day left, so it wouldn't be a surprise. Therefore, Friday is impossible, then Thursday's out, too. If I'm not hanged by Wednesday night, and Friday is ruled out, then Thursday must be the day, so again, no surprise. Following this logic backward, the prisoner eliminates each day of the week until he concludes the hanging can't happen at all. Yet, come Wednesday noon, the executioner walks in, and the prisoner is shocked. The hanging was both unexpected and exactly what the judge promised. This is the unexpected hanging paradox, a terrifying puzzle of logic and surprise. It exists at the intersection of self-reference, prediction, and psychological manipulation. It is especially alluring to secret societies, intelligence operatives, and anyone who trades in anticipation as power. The paradox hinges on the idea that knowing something changes its outcome, but that attempting to predict the unpredictable can lead you right into its trap. Now, picture how this logic might be. used by a secret society. Imagine an order that promises to reveal a great truth to its initiates, but only when they stop expecting it, or a group that threatens exposure, punishment, or reward, but only if it catches the target by surprise. Suddenly, every day becomes a test. Every message, every silence, every knock at the door could be the one. The true weapon here isn't violence or secrecy, it's uncertainty, by ensuring that an event must be unexpected. The paradox produces a state of hypervigilance, and eventually, paralysis. You can't act because anything you do to prepare eliminates the possibility. You can't not act because you might be wrong. You are caught in a web where the very act of anticipating safety guarantees your vulnerability. Secret organizations throughout history have been rumored to use this paradox psychologically, whether it's sudden disappearances, random promotions within ranks, or symbolic punishments with no warning. Uncertainty maintains dominance. Control doesn't always come from action, it comes from unpredictability. In warfare, espionage, and politics, the unexpected hanging paradox becomes a model for power. To keep your enemies guessing is to keep them weak. A tyrant need not act daily only, convince the people that he could, at any moment. That unpredictability breeds obedience, not because it is harsh, but because it is invisible until it arrives. This paradox also challenges our faith in logic. The prisoner's reasoning was airtight, flawless even, and yet, it failed. The shock of the hanging came not from ignorance, but from the illusion of knowledge. Secret societies thrive on this exact weakness. The moment when logic breaks, and obedience rushes in to fill the gap. On a philosophical level, the paradox touches on our obsession with control over the future. We make plans, predict outcomes, chart trajectories. We tell ourselves, if I can understand it, I can avoid it. But some truths, some consequences only work if they remain surprises. And some systems ensure that you never know if you're safe, or if you've just been walking toward the noose all along. Even in modern life, the spirit of this paradox persists. Consider security checks that happen randomly, performance reviews that come without warning, or governments that raid without pattern. The idea is not to act frequently, it's to ensure you're never sure when. It is anticipation, not certainty, that bends the will. In psychological terms, this creates cognitive dissonance. Your mind spins through cycles trying to resolve the contradiction. It will happen, but I won't expect it. If I expect it, it can't happen, but if I don't expect it, maybe that's when it will. Round and round it goes, until reasoning itself becomes a form of entrapment. The genius of the unexpected hanging paradox is that it reveals a dark secret about humanity. We fear most what we cannot predict, and if you can control what someone expects, you can control how they react even to the inevitable. So the next time someone warns you that something is coming but won't say when or how, ask yourself, is the threat real, or is the uncertainty the punishment? Now we shift from sudden surprises to quiet logic into a paradox that seems gentle, but hides a contradiction beneath every clean, rational explanation. All ravens are black, a tidy hypothesis, a universal statement, simple enough, but how do we prove it? According to the rules of logic, every time we see a black raven, it confirms the hypothesis, and every time we see a non-black object that is not a raven, but to believe it or not confirms the hypothesis. This idea, put forth by philosopher Carl Gustav Hempel in the 1940s, is known as Hempel's paradox, or the paradox of confirmation, and it reveals the disturbing way logic can twist our perception of truth. Let's unpack it. All ravens are black is logically equivalent to all non-black things are not ravens. So if you see a green apple, that's a non-black thing. And since it isn't a raven, it technically supports the statement. It's a non-black non-raven, just as the hypothesis predicts. Therefore, a green apple is evidence that all ravens are black. But wait, truly, how can a fruit have anything to do with the color of birds? Our intuition rebels, it feels absurd, and yet, logic agrees. This is the quiet brilliance and the deep unease of Hempel's paradox. It reveals how even valid reasoning can produce conclusions that feel profoundly wrong. Now imagine how this plays out inside a secret society, not one of shadowy rituals and cloaked figures, but of information, of thinkers who have learned to manipulate the very structure of truth. In such a group, power comes not from controlling events, but from controlling what counts as evidence. If you can convince someone that a green apple proves ravens are black, then you can make almost anything mean anything. The trick is in the framing, in the logic of confirmation, and in a world of propaganda, marketing, intelligence, warfare, and secret influence, this is a terrifying skill. Think about how governments or organizations present their narratives. One successful policy becomes proof of benevolence. One unrelated positive trend is cited as confirmation of their wisdom. The good weather, the stock market rise, a celebrity endorsement, all become evidence of deeper truths that were never actually tested. The raven remains unseen, but we keep showing you apples. Hempel's Paradox is a blueprint for how truth becomes slippery. Consider a secret society that seeks to shape world events not through action, but through framing perception. Every unrelated success is used to reinforce belief in their power. Every disaster avoided becomes a feather in their cap. They don't need to intervene directly, they just need the world to interpret random events as confirmation of their influence. This also mirrors how conspiracy theories thrive. When someone believes in a hidden hand guiding events, every news story, every death, every policy becomes evidence. Even when events have nothing to do with the theory, the believer sees confirmation. The paradox fuels a dangerous illusion that coincidence is always meaningful. But Hempel's paradox doesn't just confuse our sense of evidence, it also reveals the limits of induction. We build beliefs from repeated examples. We trust patterns. We say, this always happens, so it must be true. But the paradox warns us, even infinite examples may not confirm a universal rule, especially when the confirmations are irrelevant. In secret societies, especially those based on philosophy, mysticism, or logic, this paradox may not be a problem, it may be a tool. By embracing the ambiguity of evidence, such groups can protect their ideas behind layers of seeming validation. A symbol found in an ancient temple. Confirmation, a similar symbol on a modern building. More confirmation, a total lack of symbols. Proof they're really good at hiding. That's how belief systems insulate themselves. Not through facts, but through non-falsifiability. If every outcome is proof, then nothing disproves it. And Hempel's paradox sits quietly at the heart of this trap. Even in science, the paradox reminds us that logic alone is not enough. Context matters, not all evidence is equal. And some proofs are nothing more than mirrors reflecting our assumptions back at us. The real danger of Hempel's paradox isn't that it misleads us, it's that it gives us false confidence. It tricks us into thinking we've confirmed something when we've simply misunderstood the structure of confirmation itself. And in the world of secret knowledge, where truth is elusive, buried, encrypted, that kind of mistake is the most dangerous of all. So the next time someone presents proof, ask yourself, is this a raven, or just another apple in disguise? Now we turn to a paradox with sharp, statistical teeth, one that reveals how groups can hide the truth in plain sight, and how adding more data can sometimes make the truth vanish. Sometimes, the numbers lie. Or rather, they tell the truth but only part of it. And when you look closer, the truth they tell flips completely. This is the unsettling nature of Simpson's paradox, a phenomenon in probability and statistics, where a trend that appears in several different groups of data disappears or reverses when the groups are combined. That's not a trick. It's not bad math. It's simply what happens when you confuse the whole for the parts. And forget that data, like people, can behave very differently depending on the context. Here's a classic example. Two hospitals report success rates for a surgical procedure. Hospital A has a higher success rate than Hospital B in both men and women. But when the data is combined for all patients, Hospital B has the higher overall success rate. How? Because the group sizes and the underlying distribution were uneven. Hospital A treated more high-risk patients. When you isolate by gender, A looks better, but when you combine everything, the numbers shift and B comes out ahead. The trend reverses. This is Simpson's paradox. And in the world of secret societies where information is hidden, layered, or selectively revealed, it becomes a tool, far more dangerous than any sword or oath. Imagine an elite group manipulating global narratives. They don't change facts, they change how the facts are presented. They show you partial truths. They break the data into categories that support their story. Or they combine groups that shouldn't be combined. Masking injustice, failure, or corruption. Everything they say may be technically true, and yet it hides a deeper, opposite reality. Simpson's paradox is the paradox of statistical illusion. It tells us that numbers don't always clarify. Sometimes they mislead with precision. Secret orders dedicated to control, influence, or information warfare might not need to falsify evidence at all. They simply know how to rearrange the truth into more convenient shapes. A policy that appears to reduce crime across a population may, when broken down, have harmed minority communities. A treatment that seems ineffective overall may have saved lives in a subgroup. Context is everything, and context can be manipulated. This is why Simpson's paradox matters so deeply, because it shows how easily real harm or real success can be hidden behind aggregated numbers. You can point to the charts, you can say, look, it's working. And unless someone digs deeper, no one will know otherwise. Now consider how this paradox affects history. Many revolutions, disasters, or uprisings seem sudden in the aggregate. Everything was fine, until it wasn't. But if you break the data down by region, by class, by ethnicity, by access, you often see a very different story. The signs were always there, just hidden beneath the surface. The warning was, in the disaggregated truth. Secret societies that understand this paradox may specialize in two forms of control: hiding patterns where they exist, creating false patterns where none exist. In ancient philosophical texts, there are warnings that the appearance of harmony is not the same as harmony. The Pythagoreans, often believed to be one of the earliest, semi-secret intellectual orders, taught that numbers contain beauty but also deception. Simpson's paradox is that deception, and it echoes in modern life. Politicians cite data that supports their policies, never mentioning how the aggregation obscures racial, gender, or economic disparities. Corporations announce improvements, while quietly shifting metrics to appear successful. News headlines trumpet broad trends, rarely showing you the breakdowns that tell a very different story. But the most insidious aspect of this paradox is how it trains us to trust simplicity, to see a chart, a summary, a headline and accept it as reality. We forget that numbers, like symbols, can be rearranged, that truth, like a puzzle, can be scrambled until it still fits but shows a different picture. In secret societies that operate through perception, this is the Holy Grail. Control the data, control the conclusions. No need for mind control or dark rituals, just statistical manipulation done quietly, logically, and invisibly. Simpson's paradox reveals something deeply uncomfortable. You can know the facts and still miss the truth. You can be statistically informed and still profoundly misled. And if you're only ever shown the summary, you may never question what's hidden beneath it. So the next time someone tells you what the numbers say, ask, what's behind the trend? What was left out? What was combined? Because sometimes the truth is buried not in secrecy, but in averages. Next, we explore a paradox that strikes at the very foundation of knowledge, a contradiction born from certainty itself, and a preface that questions every page that follows. You're reading a non-fiction book meticulously researched, written by a respected expert. Every chapter is filled with carefully cited evidence, reasoned arguments, and logical conclusions. And then, in the preface, the author says something curious. Although I believe the claims in this book to be true, I acknowledge that it's likely some of them are mistaken. This is the Preface Paradox, that it captures a contradiction in how we hold beliefs. Individually, we may fully believe each statement in a body of knowledge, yet collectively, we suspect that at least one must be wrong. The paradox emerges from the clash between epistemic humility, humans are fallibly irrational, belief in specific claims that's entirely reasonable for an author or anyone to trust each fact they've written. And yet, given the complexity of information, human error, and the possibility of misunderstanding, it's also rational to assume that at least one of those facts is incorrect. So, which is it? Do you believe everything in the book? Or do you believe that some of it is false? Both answers seem rational, and yet they contradict each other. In the world of secret societies and hidden knowledge, the Preface Paradox becomes a tool not just of intellectual honesty but of strategic ambiguity. Because when the truth is slippery, uncertainty becomes armor. Imagine a society whose doctrines are passed down through symbols, allegories, and coded texts. Members are expected to believe each lesson, but they're also warned, not everything you learn is literal. Some truths are hidden in lies, some lies are hidden in truth. This tension doesn't weaken the society, it strengthens its mystique, because doubt becomes a rite of passage. You are no longer just a believer, you are a decipherer, a guardian of layered meaning. The Preface Paradox teaches that certainty and doubt can coexist, and that systems built on layered truths are harder to dismantle, because they pre-acknowledge their own flaws. Think about intelligence agencies, or political factions that issue complex reports. Each section is authored by experts, and each contributor stands by their analysis. But somewhere in the summary or introduction, there's a disclaimer. The views expressed herein may not fully represent the position of the agency. Now, the paradox takes form. The document is both trustworthy and deniable. Secretive institutions, spiritual, political, or intellectual, understand the power of this structure. It lets them present knowledge while preserving mystery. It allows for revision without collapse. If proven wrong later, they can say, but we warned you not. All things here are absolute. This is also how religions, especially mystic branches, often guard sacred texts. A parable may be held as true but also symbolic. A prophecy may be real or metaphorical. A historical claim may be core doctrine or a vessel for deeper meaning. All statements are true, and yet you must doubt them just enough. In psychology, this paradox plays out in belief systems under pressure. A person may hold dozens of strong convictions, moral, political, spiritual, yet admit, "Of course I could be wrong." That statement doesn't undermine their beliefs. In some cases, it strengthens them, making the person seem rational, balanced, open-minded. But there's a hidden cost. The more we accept fallibility at the structural level, the easier it is for systems to survive contradiction. A political party caught in a lie says, "We're not perfect." A corporation whose product harms people says, "We're always learning." The contradiction is absorbed by the preface, and this creates a kind of paradox immunity. A system can house errors without collapse. A society can protect lies beneath acknowledged uncertainty. A secret order can speak in riddles and still appear profound. This isn't always sinister, sometimes it's necessary. The world is complex. No person or group can be right all the time. But the Preface Paradox reminds us that the line between humility and obfuscation can blur quickly. Are they admitting complexity, or are they preparing an escape hatch? Some secret societies might even elevate this paradox to a spiritual principle, that ultimate truth is unknowable, and all teachings are temporary vessels, placeholders for deeper understanding. In this light, the Preface Paradox becomes not a flaw, but a form of enlightenment. But for outsiders, this makes investigation nearly impossible. You follow the trail, you study the texts, you ask the questions, and every time you think you've reached a conclusion, the response is the same: yes, but not entirely. So the next time someone claims to give you the full truth but also says, "I might be wrong," ask yourself, is this honesty, or insulation? Is this wisdom, or a warning that logic won't protect you here? Next, we explore a paradox that isn't just philosophical or statistical but ethical, a thought experiment that asks whether the truth can be protected by deception, and whether justice can exist without clarity. You're on a game show. In front of you are 3 doors. Behind one of them is a brand new car. Behind the other 2, goats. You choose door 1. The host, Monty Hall, who knows what's behind every door, opens door 3 revealing a goat. He smiles and asks, "Do you want to stick with your choice or switch to door 2? What should you do?" Most people think it doesn't matter. 2 doors, 1 price, 50/50 odds. Right, wrong. The Monty Hall Paradox, based on the real game show Let's Make a Deal, reveals something deeply counterintuitive. You should always switch. Why? Because your original choice had a 1/3 chance of being correct, and the remaining 2/3 chance is now concentrated behind the one unopened door Monty didn't choose. Let's break it down. You choose door 1, 1/3 chance of being right. That means there's a 2/3 chance the car is behind door 2 or 3. Monty opens one of those 2, but he always picks a goat. That 2/3 probability doesn't disappear. It gets redirected to the remaining unopened door, in this case, door to dot. So when he opens door 3 and offers you the switch, the odds are no longer equal. Door 1 is still 1/3. Door 2 is now 2/3. Switching gives you double the chance of winning. The Monty Hall Paradox is more than a probability puzzle. It's a mirror into human intuition, risk perception, and how easily we mistake stability for fairness. Secret societies and, indeed, any powerful institution understand this principle deeply. They don't always change the pieces, they just reveal selective information enough to influence your decision while keeping the illusion of freedom. Think of how decisions are made in public life. You're shown 3 options. 1 is eliminated with flair. You're offered a choice: stick or switch. You believe you're in control, but the structure is rigged. The game isn't about what you know, it's about what's been intentionally revealed. In espionage, this principle plays out through misdirection. A spy leaks just enough truth to build credibility, hiding their real target in plain sight. The trick isn't the lie, it's the timing of the truth. The Monty Hall Paradox also warns us about confidence traps. People tend to cling to their first choice. The idea of switching feels like admitting failure, but in doing so, they ignore the most crucial part. New information has arrived, and yet, many still stick. Not out of logic but out of pride, familiarity, or fear. Secret orders might manipulate the same weakness by guiding people toward early conclusions, and then revealing just enough to validate a shift. They can control perception, action, and belief without ever making a command. The paradox is a reminder that knowledge isn't static. Probability changes when new data arrives, and those who understand how to reveal data one piece at a time control the future far more than those who simply possess knowledge. So the next time someone opens a door and shows you a goat, don't just celebrate that your first guess survived. Ask, what changed? What remains hidden? And what are the odds now? Here's a scenario that will make your brain drift into a dream state of confusion. Sleeping Beauty is told the following before she's put to sleep. On Sunday night, she will be sedated. A fair coin will be flipped. If it lands heads, she will be awakened on Monday, interviewed, then put back to sleep, and not awakened again. If it lands tails, she will be awakened on Monday, interviewed, put back to sleep, and also awakened again on Tuesday for another identical interview. Each time she wakes, she won't remember any previous awakening now. When Sleeping Beauty wakes up, she is asked, what is the probability that the coin landed heads? What would you say at first glance? The answer seems obvious. The coin is fair 50/50ths, but think carefully. If the coin landed heads, there's only one awakening. If it landed tails, there are two awakenings, one on Monday and one on Tuesday. And since she doesn't remember any previous wake-up, she has no idea which day it is. She might be in either scenario, but one of them gives her twice the chance of being here. So the probability shifts. Many philosophers argue the correct answer is 1/3 for heads, 2/3 for tails, because out of the three possible awakening moments, heads Monday, tails Monday, tails Tuesday, only one corresponds to heads. Others insist it's still 50/50ths because the coin hasn't changed. Only Beauty's information has. This is the Sleeping Beauty Paradox, and it shakes the foundation of how we define probability, observation, and self-locating beliefs about where or when we are. In the world of secret societies, this paradox becomes chillingly relevant because it asks not just what is true, but how many times are you told it's true. Imagine an order that repeats information again and again in subtly different settings. You wake each day and are told, the mission is just, the purpose is sacred. You do not remember the previous time it was said, but each repetition reinforces the belief, not because it's more true, but because it feels more frequent. The Sleeping Beauty Paradox shows how perception can be manipulated by repetition and forgetfulness. The same message, repeated under different contexts, creates the illusion of confirmation, just like the two awakenings for tails outweigh the single one for heads. Two exposures to an idea feel more real than one. This is how propaganda works, how indoctrination works, how soft control is exercised. Not by changing facts, but by changing how often you encounter them. Beauty wakes up and thinks, this must be tails. Not because she knows, but because the structure is biased to more encounters under that outcome. And what if we live in a system where some narratives are shown to us twice as often, twice as loudly, twice as emotionally? Then we too might begin to believe in the more frequent version of truth, even if the truth itself hasn't changed. Sleeping Beauty teaches us that probability isn't always about chance. Sometimes it's about perspective. And when you can't remember what came before, even your own beliefs become unreliable. So ask yourself, are you calculating truth, or counting how often it shows up in your dreams? Now that we've walked through 25 mind-twisting paradoxes, from ravens and crocodiles to sleeping prophets and impossible bridges, we arrive at the final chapter where all the contradictions converge. We have wandered through doors that change their odds, through dreams that bend probability, through statements that defeat themselves, and rules that punish their own creators. These 25 paradoxes were not just riddles for amusement. They were mirrors reflecting back the limits of logic, the fragility of belief, and the strange theater of control that plays beneath the surface of history. But in the quiet world of secret societies, these paradoxes take on a different tone. They are not just abstract thought experiments, they are tools. They confuse, delay, protect, conceal. They are used to build systems that can't be questioned, symbols that mean one thing and the opposite, oaths that reveal themselves only when broken. What these paradoxes show us is that power doesn't always live in certainty. It often thrives in contradiction, in the hesitation between options, in the disbelief we feel when the rules no longer make sense. The liar paradox showed us that truth can be twisted simply by declaring it false. The ship paradox warned that identity may survive even after every part has changed. The twin paradox taught us that time itself is relative and that who we become may depend more on motion than intention. And then we reached Buridan's bridge, Moore's paradox, and the Preface Paradox statements that catch themselves in logical snares. Even the Crocodile Paradox, which seems like a strange myth, turns out to be a blueprint for how systems offer justice while making it unreachable. But perhaps the most haunting paradox of all is this. You can know something is broken and still be bound by it. You can realize that your reasoning is flawed, that your belief is circular, that your evidence is distorted and still carry forward, because there is no clean place to escape to. That's the final trap these paradoxes present. Not only are the rules broken, the very tools of correction are compromised. This is the ultimate weapon of a secret order, not a hidden truth, but the confusion that surrounds the pursuit of it. It is not the answer they guard, but the path itself. And so, by the time you ask, what is the truth? You're already too deep, because every direction has its own contradiction. Every system eats its own tail. But here's what matters. Paradoxes aren't signs of failure, they are thresholds. They mark the edges of what our minds can currently hold, and crossing them doesn't destroy understanding, it expands it. Secret societies may use paradox to hide, but philosophers, thinkers, dreamers, they use it to seek. Each paradox we explored asked you to let go of something, a fixed belief, a familiar logic, a cherished conclusion, and in its place, it gave you something harder, but more deeper awareness of uncertainty. We were never promised answers here, only the chance to ask better questions, to sit in the dark long enough for our eyes to adjust. So as you drift, now perhaps toward sleep, perhaps into deeper thought, remember that these riddles aren't just puzzles, they are keys, not to unlock anything outside of you, but to open the locked doors within. Truth may not be waiting behind any one of them, but the search, the act of turning the handle is what matters. And that, in the end, may be the most beautiful paradox of all. The more impossible the answer, the more essential the question. Sleep well, question always, and walk boldly through the next door.